an exhaustive speech about all the things we're doing. I know you both know these subjects intimately and have a lot of experience and track record in talking about them. So I'll just briefly describe what we're doing, and then we can just have a general discussion about it. In essence, what we're bringing before the board, Supervisor Lawson-Remer and myself, is just having the Board of Supervisors make a clear and definitive statement about what our approach is going to be surrounding the Climate Action Plan and our efforts to tackle climate change. I think for most of the last few decades, I believe the majority of the Board of Supervisors had a wrong approach when it comes to our Climate Action Plan, when it comes to how we align development with that, when it comes to prioritization. And I think that the county's previous approach and attitude, of which I was in opposition to, has had stinging rebukes from the courts time and time again. And so I think at a certain point, the previous board certainly joined in and no longer having a desire to continue to appeal things, that they continue to be told everything you're doing is wrong. I have joked, I don't know what Judge Taylor will do with all of his free time now that the county's going to move in a different direction. He can take up a new hobby, but it is certainly our intent, my intent, that as a board, we're not back before his court debating about what needs to be in the Climate Action Plan. We are going to accept that that is settled. And so what we're doing in this letter is making a statement of values about what our position is as it relates to climate action plans, and then providing clear direction to the county staff that are developing the new climate action plan, that it must be comprehensive, it must be legally enforceable, it cannot rely on the purchase of carbon offsets to meet emission reduction targets. It needs to use updated data and modeling, and it needs to emphasize environmental justice and equity and shaped by community input. And at a minimum, achieve Senate Bill 32 greenhouse gas reductions. Those are 40% below the 1990 levels by 2030. And we also wanted to establish actions to meet the net carbon emissions by 2045, which is in line by Governor Brown's executive order that came out in 2018, I believe. And so we're providing them clear direction of where they need to go. And I think that this will shape in the affirmative, like a approach to these issues that certainly the majority of the Board of Supervisors have said they want to go. And then we have a lot of work that we need to do. We have a lot of work around climate adaptation. I mean, some of what we're trying to do is slow the impacts of climate change and do our part. And a part of what we have to do is accept the realities that things like wildfire patterns, weather patterns, rising sea level are a reality. And we need to talk about how do we adapt to that. I think there's a lot of opportunities around carbon sequestration in both our natural and working lands. We ought to be exploring as a county how we do. We've got some work to do to prepare for Governor Newsom's executive order around zero emission vehicles. 2 years ago, we adopted our electric vehicle roadmap, which was designed not only to change what we do as a county, but to start to provide the framework countywide for how we really think about transitioning a really massive industry, when you think about charging stations and gas stations and kind of all of that. And so this is just kind of laying the groundwork, having us make a clear and definitive statement and providing unambiguous guidance to staff about what we expect to be in the climate action plan that they are working on, along with reporting back to us with regular progress and updates on what they're doing. So that's the essence of what we're doing.
So
now we can ask questions. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
you go first. Go ahead.
Sorry. The first thing that comes to mind for me is there going to be any change on the county staff that is going to be tasked with developing the climate action plan?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think in general, Eric, that the county staff operate consistent with the will of the majority of the board. And so there's a lot of folks out there that have blamed county staff for climate action plans that were drafted that were consistent with the direction of the majority of the board. And I think one reason I think it's important at our first board meeting, first board meeting, that we make clear what the direction of the county is so that the staff can fulfill that direction. And so, again, I believe that complaints with the staff approach to previous climate action plans really are complaints with the staff direction given to them by the Board of Supervisors. And so I think once we take this action, we will see a different outcome.
And then the other part of the question was, what kind of a timetable are we looking at? It sounds like the approach that you're talking about or describing is one that's somewhat involved, that would require some time. So what kind of a timeline are we looking at?
Well, we've asked them to come back with bi-monthly updates. We want it done with a sense of urgency, but I think we have to recognize and understand that we're going in a fundamentally new direction. And that is going to require some work. I mean, just take the data piece alone. I want us to reset baselines and reset assumptions. I'm not just going to inherit the previous baselines and assumptions and say that's what we're going to operate on moving forward, because I don't have a high degree of confidence that those are inherently right. And so, the process of going to recalculate GHG emissions and recalculating projections of emissions through 2050, these are things that are going to take a little bit. So I think you're going to see board pressure to move with a sense of urgency, but also an understanding that when you're literally taking a 180 shift on what you're doing and how you're going, it is going to take a little bit of time. And so I think, by getting bi-monthly updates, it'll remain top of mind, and the staff knows they will have to come back and present progress to the board. And you have a board that will be eager to see change. But I wouldn't be comfortable ascribing a date at this date. We will be able to do that. I think a part of that is initially going to be assessing what's the body of work that needs to be done, and then start putting some projections on each of those pieces. And so I think we'll be better able to answer that question in the coming months.
Okay, I guess it's to me now. So help me understand, because I'm newer to this than Eric probably, but so you said the new plan cannot rely on the purchase of carbon offsets, which means it's not off the table, right? Carbon offsets.
Yeah, no, it's not. And even Judge Taylor's rulings, Mackenzie, it wasn't off the table. I mean, if they were in county and they were verifiable and they were, enforceable, that was something that was allowed for. And so we're not ruling that section out, but the purchase of them, going out and purchasing them, certainly from out of country or out of jurisdictions ones, are just things we're not going to rely on for purposes of that. And again, that's consistent with Judge Taylor's multiple rulings.
So what's the big 180 switch then that you see? Like, can you describe that a little further?
I mean, I think in fairness, I would say most recent board action to say we're not going to appeal again in some ways signified that switch. But I will tell you, from a board standpoint, I think that was done more under duress than actually embracing where we need to go. This is the board embracing and saying clearly, this is what we believe as a county, and our plans and attitudes need to reflect that. And so I do think it is a fundamentally different. This board letter would have zero chance of passing 2 weeks ago. Now we have a new board, and so I think it's important that, again, and it's not, there are parts of this that are symbolic in the sense of, we're making a statement of values, but there are parts of this that are very specific about what our climate action plan needs to do. And so it is very specific guidance and direction to the county team that is developing the new climate action plan on what it needs to look like and what needs to be included. And I do think it is important too on the data piece that we go and get, again, new baselines, new projections, new assumptions. So, we're not falling into a trap of meeting a threshold or standard that may not be accurate.
So this will require a whole new setting of a baseline. It's not like just closing the gap between one you understood before, and
right.
You're actually going to reissue it based on this 1990 level.
That's
and
right.
that. Okay. And then carbon, you want to be zero carbon by 2045 as well. Okay.
That's
and
right.
So you kind of touched on it, but like what sectors of the county's economy do you think, because it's heavily dependent, as I understood it, on developers to get these carbon offsets. So like what other sectors of the economy do you think this will weigh heavily on in terms of meeting that goal?
Well, that's a part of what we got to do in the planning process, is go through and identify where are those opportunities and how would we get there. And I think that's what'll be insightful. I mean, if we have good data, we have good projections, we know where we need to go, then we can start assessing where are those GHG reductions and how might we achieve them. But this isn't going to be easy. I don't want to in any way forestall that this is inherently an easy thing. This will be a difficult process, and I think we're aware of that. We're also aware we have to do it.
So
can I chime in for just a
sure.
quick
Yeah, of course,
clear statement? So I think one of the other really important, and I'm Emily, I'm a policy advisor for Supervisor or for Chair Fletcher. One of the other important things is just the scaling up of ambition of all the different climate measures that we have in the previous climate action plan. And the mitigation measures we had previously were really just kind of around reducing emissions around the edges, and aligned with things that were fairly easy to do and weren't these big changes to our land use, to our zoning, to actually reduce measures or reduce emissions from the transportation sector and the like.
One of the things that the county has been criticized for in its previous iterations of climate action plans is kind of this lack of public input. How will that play out over the course of the next year?
Yeah, the actual recommendation 2, Eric, when we direct the CAO, the recommendation 1 is around the structure of the climate action plan, right? It needs to not rely on the purchase of offsets and carbon neutrality and all of that. Number 2 is to conduct stakeholder engagement, hold public hearings, and undertake environmental review. And so we're actually directing them that in the development of this, that has to be foundational to what you're doing. Is engaging and working with folks. And it's not just the parties to the litigation that we have been working with. It has to be broader than that. And some of this item goes kind of hand in hand with the transparency piece we're doing. It's a separate board action, which is just about the county culturally becoming more engaged with input and engagement around everything that we do, from the budget. So I think some of this is just kind of a cultural shift that needs to be undertaken in that regard. But we did spell out a specific recommendation directing staff to make sure there's stakeholder engagement, there's public hearings, there's other types of things so people can provide input and feedback. Doesn't mean everyone will agree, but we certainly want everyone to have input, and we want to achieve that again in a very purposeful way.
And so I know that the time is not realistic, but at the end of the year, say for example, you have your climate plan developed and ready to present in, hypothetically,
Right.
What do you think are the elements that will be most different from the previous iterations?
Yeah.
What are the things that are going to be, that are going to distinguish it from previous effort?
That's right. I think the point Emily made earlier that was so good, which it really is around levels of ambition. I think the previous plan, kind of had a series of efforts in there that were, kind of checking the box, okay, we're kind of doing this, we're kind of doing this, we're kind of doing this. And I think what's going to have to come back is going to have to be a significantly more ambitious commitment. We're not just going to say, well, okay, we're going to get to 90% renewable. We're going to get to 100%, and we're going to do it by here. I think that there's a lot of opportunities around, again, issues of climate adaptation, of carbon sequestration. I think that there are opportunities that if we will embrace those in an ambitious spirit, we will be able to move significantly. And I think that when you're just not able to rely on purchasing offsets out of jurisdictions for everything, that will force you to get much more creative about potentially in-county projects that you could do that could have a meaningful impact on our environment here where we're reaping the same benefit. And so I think it'll just be a fundamental rethink and shift of what we're doing. But I think that the notion of kind of levels of ambition are very relevant to this in terms of, are you just checking a box to try and barely survive a legal challenge, or are you truly embracing the opportunity to meaningfully impact climate change in San Diego?
Supervisor Fletcher, you mentioned adaptation a couple times, and usually like when I learn about CAPs, they're mostly mitigation tools. So are you talking about actually putting in plans to do climate change adaptation?
I think we should. Should. McKinsey, whether it fits into the CAP or whether it's something separate, I don't think it's something we can avoid. I think when we look at what happened in Northern California around wildfires, I think when we face the reality of everything that's happening, I think that has to be a part of our planning. I mean, there's things we want to do to mitigate how severe climate change is going to be. And then there's just an acceptance and recognition that it's already changing what happens now. And so I think that we need to adapt to the reality.
What does that look like for a county with a lot of, what does that look like for county?
Well, it could revolve around wildfire. It could revolve around development in high fire-prone areas. I mean, it could take on a whole host of different mechanisms that we would do. So, I just think again that's where we need folks to really go out and explore. What are some of those things that we need to do, and likewise around issues of like carbon sequestration, a little bit different. But whether that is I've done a little bit of work around marshlands, and those aren't in the county jurisdiction, but there's where there's some significant opportunities, right, for natural carbon sequestration, and how do we go explore more of those type of opportunities?
I was also going to ask, is the county still exploring a CCA or joining one?
Yeah. So we had essentially made the decision to move forward. We kind of paused because there was some jurisdictional issues about which JPA we would join. And so we're going to have to revisit that and get that done. My preference would just be to join with the city of San Diego and move forward as one. I think that there is a value in economies of scale. I've had several conversations with Mayor Gloria about this, and I think we're generally aligned on how we need to go. So the city's got a little bit of work to do. County's got a little bit of work to do, but that's something else we're going to have to tackle this year.
And then I just wanted to ask too, this is, so 40% of the 1990 levels, that's something that you have to follow because it's a state law, or you have to pick that level?
Senate Bill 32, you have to do 40% below the 1990 levels by 2030.
By 2030. Conceivably, since emissions rise as the years go forward, could you not pick a more ambitious goal, or do you?
Yeah, and we actually have that in there. That we want to develop a climate action plan that meets and exceeds state mandates.
Okay, so that's your baseline goal, and then you hope to set up when you establish these values.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So just really quickly for me, and this is it for me, but your Senate Bill 32 is an issue that you're trying to come in compliance with. Are there other state mandates that
Yes.
the county is required to meet, and what are?
Yeah, so Governor Brown's executive order, it was B5518, was his executive order on net carbon emissions by 2045. And then it's not spelled out in the board letter, but I think it'll be encapsulated in the CAP, will be the governor's executive order on zero emission vehicles.
Zero emission vehicles by 2035.
Yeah.
Only new vehicles sold in the state of California
Yep.
will have to be zero emission. Okay.
Yep.
How does the county enforce that?
I think the county has to provide, I think what we have to think about on this, McKinsey, is how do we help facilitate that becoming a reality? And so like in our electric vehicle roadmap, we talked about getting all of the 18 cities in the county, if we could all agree on streamlined permitting for electric charging stations, then someone who wanted to come in and do a significant investment in electric charging stations would literally have one portal or one place, and they could cross jurisdictional lines in installing those. And so when you think about there's two ways you can do. You either require people to buy the new cars, and then they got to figure out how to do it, or we can figure out how to make it easier, how to make it, a little bit more equitable, and how we get ahead of the curve there. And so I think we have a few years where we can again, really focus on how do we build out the EV charging network. Totally unrelated to this, but I'm really concerned that, and I think about this as a member of the Air Resources Board, that because of this, there's going to be so much focus on new car purchases that we're going to lose sight of the secondary market. And I worry greatly that we're not going to get the corresponding air quality or EJ benefits from zero emission cars if it's only new car purchase, because a lot of people in the communities most impacted by air quality are never going to buy a brand new electric car. And so I'm working through CARB. I'm looking at some legislation we may need. Perhaps there's something the county can do around how do we flush out that secondary market. So it's not just a focus on new. If we just wait for new purchase of electric vehicles to hit our AB 617 communities, it'll be 15 years after that goes into effect. And so I think there's some other things that we need to be thinking about in addition to that. And that might not inherently fit in the cap. Maybe it does. Would certainly fit under the Air Pollution Control District and the Air Resources Board about things that we need to do. But again, I just worry greatly. You know, at CARB, I've pushed to lower the amount of the rebate for new cars, because if you're buying a, you know, $104,000 Tesla, I don't think you need a state rebate at all. And if we can go into the secondary market and help folks in Barrio Logan get their first EV, and by the way, there's very few charging stations down there because there's very few electric cars. So I think there's some work that we need to do around that issue.
When you say secondary market, you just mean
Use EVs.
Hey, folks, we
I
got
don't
probably like,
understand, Mackenzie, on that, Mackenzie, I don't understand. It's really, there is not an availability of used EVs. Like,
yeah.
There's something missing there. There's something that's missing in that.
Well, why does it?
Where do they go? Where do they all go?
Well, why does it have to go from you have a clunky gas powered car straight to EV? Like, there's also research about the amount of like benefit of just improving like diesel to gas. Is that being missed? I mean, no, we're doing that's probably like a larger
No. We got 5 minutes left. We can go on this. But like, look, at MTS this month, we're going to get rid of our last diesel bus on fixed routes. Gone. Right. So that is significant improvement. But thank you, Eric. But I think Mackenzie, what's